Let's be completely honest for a second. Every family has that one bizarre, unspoken rule that makes absolutely no sense to anyone outside of it. Some families aren't allowed to wear shoes on the rug. Some families have a specific relative you aren't supposed to mention at Thanksgiving. And my family had an old wooden chest in the attic. I'm Leo, by the way, and growing up, my grandfather was basically a living cartoon character. He was this incredibly loud, fiercely stubborn man who survived on a diet of black coffee, filtered cigarettes, and sheer spite. He married my grandmother back in the late 1960s after knowing her for literally 3 weeks, and they spent the next 50 years living in this massive, drafty Victorian house out in the countryside. My grandmother was the sweet, baking cookies type, but Grandpa's was different. He was always looking over his shoulder. And whenever I would visit as a kid and try to explore the house, he would grab my shoulder with this surprisingly tight grip, point up toward the attic stairs, and say the exact same phrase. "Leo, whatever you do in this life, you do not touch the red chest. It has been passed down for 4 generations, and it stays closed."
Naturally, as a 10-year-old kid, I thought he was just being a dramatic old man trying to protect his vintage liquor stash or some boring war medals. I didn't think much of it because when you're that age, an old chest just sounds like a prop from a bad movie. Fast forward about 15 years. I grew up, managed to convince an incredibly smart and beautiful woman named Maya to actually marry me, and life was going completely normal. Then my grandfather passed away at the ripe old age of 88. Because my parents had already moved out of state, the old Victorian house fell into my lap.
Maya and I didn't really have the funds to keep a massive historic estate, so we made the logical decision to fix it up, deep clean it, and put it on the market for a quick sale. We arrived at the house on a bleak Saturday afternoon in November. The place had been sitting empty for months, and it had that specific heavy smell of dust, old wood, and stagnant air. We spent the first few hours downstairs, sorting through old paperwork and packing up dishes. But by the time the sun started to dip, I knew I had to tackle the attic. Maya stayed in the living room taping up boxes, while I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the creaky, narrow stairs to the very top of the house. The attic was exactly how I remembered it from my childhood. Cluttered, dark, and freezing cold. And right there in the far corner, sitting under a thick layer of dust, was the red chest. It was made of a heavy, dark wood that had been painted a dull, deep crimson color that looked almost like dried blood. It had massive iron straps wrapped around it, but to my absolute surprise, there was no padlock. It was just held shut by a simple metal latch. I stood there, staring at it for what felt like 20 minutes, and my brain went into a massive, exhausting internal monologue. I started overthinking the entire concept of family curses and old warnings. Part of me was thinking, Leo, don't be an idiot. Your grandfather was an eccentric old man who probably just didn't want you messing with his private belongings. But another part of me, this quiet, instinctual voice in the back of my head, was telling me to turn around and walk down the stairs. Why would a man who loved me so much make such a massive deal about a piece of furniture? Was it a joke?
Was it some weird psychological game? If I open it, am I disrespecting his memory, or am I just satisfying a 20-year-old curiosity? It's just a box. It's literally just wood and iron. There is nothing inside that can physically hurt a grown man. Before I could talk myself out of it again, I stepped forward, reached down, and flipped the heavy iron latch. The metal made a loud, echoing clack that felt way too loud in the empty attic.
I slowly lifted the heavy wooden lid. The hinges didn't even creak. I shined my flashlight inside, expecting to see old clothes, photos, or maybe absolutely nothing at all.
Inside the chest, there was only one thing. It was a large, heavy mirror laid flat against the bottom, facing upward. But the glass wasn't normal. It was dark, almost like obsidian, and it didn't reflect the flashlight beam at all. When I leaned over to look at my own reflection, my face looked completely distorted, like my eyes were hollow sockets and my mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. A sudden wave of intense nausea hit my stomach, and the air in the attic instantly felt 50 degrees colder. I slammed the lid shut, latched it, and practically sprinted down the stairs. I didn't tell Maya what I saw, because I felt ridiculous for being so shaken by a strange mirror.
Since it was already past 9 p.m. and the drive back to our apartment was over 2 hours, we decided to just sleep in my grandfather's old bedroom downstairs for the night and finish the cleaning in the morning. That was the biggest mistake of our lives.
Around 2 a.m., the paranormal activity started. I woke up abruptly to the sound of heavy footsteps directly above our heads. It wasn't the sound of a small animal. It was the distinct, rhythmic thud of heavy boots walking back and forth across the attic floorboards. Maya woke up a second later, clutching my arm in absolute terror. She whispered, "Leo, someone is up there." Before I could even answer her, the footsteps stopped right above the bedroom ceiling. Then we heard a low, wet scraping sound coming from the hallway right outside our bedroom door. It sounded like something heavy and organic was being dragged slowly across the hardwood.
I grabbed the flashlight, my hands shaking violently, and unlocked the bedroom door. I shined the light down the long, narrow hallway. The hallway was completely empty, but every single closet door along the wall was wide open. And then my light hit the ceiling at the end of the hall. The attic pull-down door had been lowered, and the wooden ladder was hanging all the way down to the floor. Standing at the very top of the ladder, visible only from the waist down, was a pair of legs wearing faded gray flannel trousers and heavy work boots. The legs were completely motionless, just dangling there in the dark.
Maya let out a sharp, panicked scream, and in that exact second, the flashlight bulb burst, plunging us into total darkness. We didn't wait to see what was coming down that ladder. We literally dropped everything, ran out the front door into the freezing night air, tumbled into our car, and floors the gas pedal. We didn't stop driving until we reached a well-lit diner miles away.
We never went back to that house. I hired an independent real estate agency to handle the rest of the clean-out and put the property on the market immediately. A few months later, a wealthy family from out of town bought the estate for a very generous sum of money. I felt a slight twinge of guilt, but I rationalized it by telling myself that maybe the house just hated me, or maybe I had just suffered from a massive stress-induced hallucination. 2 years passed, and life had finally returned to normal. Then, on a quiet Tuesday evening, I was sitting in the living room while Maya was making dinner in the kitchen. I had the local news channel playing in the background while I scrolled through my phone. Suddenly, the anchor's voice took on a very somber, serious tone. I looked up at the screen, and my heart completely stopped. They were showing a live broadcast from the front yard of my grandfather's old Victorian house. There were police cars everywhere, flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the dark windows. I called out to Maya, my voice breaking so badly I could barely get the words out. She walked into the living room, wiping her hands on a towel, and we both stared at the television screen in absolute frozen silence.
The reporter stated that the family who had purchased the home 2 years prior, a mother, a father, and their teenage son, had all been discovered dead inside the house earlier that afternoon. The authorities were ruling it a mass suicide. They had all been found in the attic, hung from the heavy wooden rafter beams by thick ropes. And right underneath their dangling feet, sitting perfectly open, was the red wooden chest.
I turned off the television, and the room went completely silent. Maya just sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the blank screen, tears slowly rolling down her face. We never spoke about that house ever again, and we moved to a different state the following month. Because the realization that a family lost their lives because I couldn't control my own curiosity, that is a burden that literally never leaves your soul.
So yeah, now Maya and I live in a cookie-cutter suburban townhouse where the most paranormal thing that happens is the Wi-Fi dropping during a movie. But honestly, the real horror is that every single time we go to IKEA or walk past a home decor store and Maya eyes up a quirky vintage storage bin, we both just freeze and stare at each other like we're recovering from an active war zone. I guess the moral of the story is that if an elderly relative tells you a specific piece of furniture is cursed, you don't overthink it, you don't write a long internal monologue about it, and you definitely don't open it. You just call a junk removal service and make it someone else's problem. It sounds terrible and cynical to say out loud, but trust me, dealing with a slightly haunted conscience is a lot easier when you're doing it from a safe distance in a house that doesn't have an attic.
I have always considered myself a pretty solid driver, the kind of guy who prides himself on avoiding potholes and boasting about gas mileage. My wife, Sarah, usually handles the navigation, because if it were up to me, we would probably end up driving into a lake while arguing with the GPS. We were on our way back from a weekend getaway in upstate New York, driving down one of those pitch-black, single-lane county roads where the only scenery is endless rows of pine trees and the occasional dead cell phone tower. I was casually making a joke about how we were basically characters in a cliché horror movie setup, laughing it off like the confident city guy I thought I was.
Then, out of nowhere, a massive, metallic thud echoed through the floorboards. It sounded like we had hit a stray cinder block or a deeply embedded piece of scrap metal. The steering wheel violently jerked out of my hands, and the front end of the sedan immediately began to drag and sag against the asphalt. I pulled over onto the muddy shoulder, letting out a heavy sigh, and stepped out of the car to inspect the damage. To my absolute disbelief, both of our front tires were completely blown out, sliced clean through the sidewalls as if we had driven over a deliberately placed spike strip. I hopped back into the driver's seat, pulled out my phone, and was met with that beautiful, comforting phrase, "No service." Sarah checked hers, and, surprise, absolutely nothing. I sat there for a minute, my sarcasm quickly draining away. We were 30 miles from the nearest major town. The clock read 1:30 a.m., and our car was effectively a 2-ton paperweight. I told Sarah that I remembered passing a small, dimly lit gas station about a mile and a half back, and that I was going to jog down the road to see if they had a mechanic or a landline we could use. Sarah immediately grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with a sudden, intense panic, and begged me not to go. She told me that overthinking was her specialty, and that leaving her alone in the middle of nowhere was a terrible idea. I tried to use my classic husband logic to calm her down, giving her a reassuring kiss, locking all the doors from the outside, and telling her to stay put no matter what. I disappeared into the dark, leaving her with nothing but the dim glow of the dashboard lights. About 20 minutes after I left, Sarah was sitting in the passenger seat,
staring intently into the rearview mirror. Out of the absolute stillness of the woods, a figure emerged from the shadows of the tree line. In the faint moonlight, it looked like a tall, slender woman wearing a long, tattered vintage floral dress that dragged in the dirt.
The woman didn't walk past the car. She stepped directly into the middle of the road, stopped, and just stared at our vehicle. Sarah froze, crouching down as low as she could in the seat, hoping the tinted glass would hide her. For what felt like an eternity, this stranger just stood there, completely motionless, glaring at the car with an intense, unblinking focus. Then, without a single sound, the woman turned around and began walking down the exact same dark road I had taken, disappearing into the fog. Sarah went into a state of total, frantic hysteria, desperately pressing the call button on her lifeless phone, praying for a single bar of signal, but there was absolutely no hope.
Another 15 minutes passed before the silence was broken by the sound of heavy, panicked breathing. I came sprinting out of the darkness, my face pale, sweating profusely, and frantically fumbling with the car keys to unlock the door. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and locked it behind me, gasping for air. Sarah screamed. What happened? Who was that woman? I looked at her, my hand shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel, and told her the entire twisted story. I had walked about a mile down the road when I noticed a faint light coming from a small, dilapidated house hidden deep behind the trees. As I approached the porch to knock on the door, I looked through the front window and saw a frail, elderly woman sitting inside, but something felt entirely wrong. The house smelled faintly of bleach and decay, and on the kitchen table I could clearly see a police scanner buzzing with static, alongside several heavy-duty tools and a bucket filled with twisted metal spikes, the exact same kind that had shredded our tires. Before I could even process what I was looking at, I heard a floorboard creak directly behind me on the dark porch. I turned around, just in time to see a tall, muscular man standing over me holding a heavy iron tire iron, while the old woman inside slowly turned her head toward the window and smiled a horrific, toothless grin. I realized then that the woman Sarah had seen on the road wasn't a woman at all. It was a man wearing a dress, acting as a scout to see if anyone was still inside the disabled vehicle. I had barely managed to dodge the swing of the tire iron, tumbling off the porch and sprinting through the woods back to the car to protect my wife. We stayed locked in that car, completely paralyzed, until a state trooper luckily happened to drive down that isolated route around 5 a.m. We flagged down the officer and immediately reported a massive, detailed complaint about the house and the ambush. Within 48 hours, a full police task force raided the rural property, and a 60-year-old woman named Martha, along with her 2 adult sons, were arrested. The details that came out in the local news over the following weeks were absolutely heinous. This wasn't just a simple roadside robbery ring. The elderly woman had been acting as the mastermind for a highly organized kidnapping, grand theft auto, and human trafficking operation that had been running for nearly a decade. The authorities discovered multiple hidden cellars beneath the house containing identification cards from over 30 missing travelers, heavy weaponry, and evidence of illegal chemical manufacturing used to sedate victims. I've always been convinced that the absolute peak of adult luxury is taking a ridiculously long, burning hot shower on a Friday night
after a brutal 40-hour work week. My name is Ethan, and I am the definition of a creature of habit. My wife, Chloe, always roasts me for having a baseline routine that never changes. But hey, predictability keeps you alive. Or at least that's what I used to think. We live in a quiet, newly developed suburban neighborhood where the most dramatic event on any given week is someone's dog digging up a neighbor's pristine flower bed. It was around 8:30 p.m. on a rainy Friday, and I had just finished locking up the house and setting my work keys on the kitchen counter, ready to entirely dissolve into a cloud of steam for the next 30 minutes.
I went into our master bathroom, turned the dial until the water was practically boiling, and stripped down. Just as I was about to step behind the glass barrier, I heard the heavy brass doorknob of the bathroom door rattle violently. Then the wood creaked as if someone was throwing their entire body weight against it, trying to force the lock open. I let out a light-hearted laugh, completely unbothered, and called out, "Hey babe, I'm in here, just about to take a shower. If you need the hairdryer, it's under the sink."
There was absolute stone-cold silence from the other side of the wood. No chuckle from Chloe, no sarcastic comment, nothing. I figured she was just playing a joke on me or was too distracted by her phone to reply, so I shook my head and stepped under the running water. But before the soap could even lather, my phone, which was sitting right next to the sink, started buzzing loudly against the marble countertop. I leaned out of the shower, swiped the screen with a wet thumb, and answered it on speaker.
I said, "Babe, I literally just told you I'm trying to take a shower. It will only take 5 minutes, I promise." Through the speaker, Chloe's voice came through, sounding entirely confused and static heavy. She said, "Ethan, what are you talking about? I ain't at home, dude. I'm still stuck at the office finishing up this inventory report. I won't be back for another hour."
My brain instantly short-circuited. A wave of pure, ice-cold panic hit my chest, completely washing away the warmth of the steam. If Chloe was 30 miles away at her corporate office, then who on earth was currently standing on the other side of my locked bathroom door? I stepped out of the tub onto the bath mat, dripping wet, and carefully grabbed my phone, lowering the volume so it wouldn't echo.
I crept close to the door and began whispering into the receiver, my voice trembling so badly I could barely form words. I explained the entire situation to her, how someone had just tried to force the handle, how they were currently standing perfectly still in our dark bedroom, and how I was completely trapped and naked in a room with no second exit. Chloe's tone instantly shifted from casual to dead serious. She told me to stay exactly where I was, keep the water running so the intruder wouldn't know I was on the phone, and reassured me that she was calling the local police department right this second.
For the next 20 minutes, I stood frozen in that foggy bathroom, staring at the bottom gap of the door. The shadow of 2 large, heavy boots appeared in the sliver of light from the hallway. Whoever it was, they weren't rummaging through our jewelry box or looking for a television to steal. They were just waiting for the sound of the shower to turn off.
Suddenly, the distant, muffled sound of sirens echoed through the neighborhood, followed by the loud, chaotic crash of our front door being kicked in. The police had arrived. I heard heavy shouting, a brief struggle in the bedroom, and the sharp metallic click of handcuffs. An officer knocked loudly on the bathroom door, identifying himself and telling me it was safe to come out. I threw on a towel, unlocked the door, and walked out into my bedroom, where Chloe was already waiting with a blanket, holding me tightly. At first, I honestly thought it was just a regular, desperate thief looking for a quick payout. But Oh dear God, I was completely wrong.
When the detectives ran the fingerprints of the man they had tackled to the floor, the entire reality of the situation turned into a living nightmare. The intruder wasn't a burglar. He was a notorious, transient serial killer, dubbed by the regional task force as the Hinterland Butcher. His specific, horrific pattern involved targeting suburban homes, checking for lone male occupants, and using a heavy-duty meat cleaver he kept hidden inside a canvas duffel bag. He had spent the last 2 years successfully evading authorities across 3 states, leaving behind a trail of heinous crimes that exclusively targeted men who lived alone or were left temporarily by themselves. The police found the cleaver, several rolls of heavy industrial tape, and a plastic tarp inside the bag he had dropped right outside my bathroom door. So yeah, that completely cured me of my love for long, relaxing evening showers. Now, every single time I need to wash up, I make sure Chloe is sitting right there in the living room, the house alarm is fully armed, and I leave the bathroom door wide open so I can see the entire hallway. It completely ruins the privacy and makes the bathroom freezing cold, but honestly, dealing with a drafty shower is a million times better than turning off the water and finding out someone else has been listening to the melody.
That's it for today's video, and probably nobody is listening to this because you can see the views in my previous 4 videos. It's not even 50 when you add all the views. But anyways, if you are hearing this, please consider liking this video and suggesting on what topic I should make my next video on. Bye.